I watched in shock as my mother-in-law, Vivian, dropped my passport into the crackling fireplace during our Easter brunch, her eyes never leaving mine as she whispered, "Now you'll have to listen to reason." Nobody in the dining room moved. Not my husband, not his sisters, not even our children, as I realized this family wasn't just trying to take my house. They were willing to destroy my identity to do it. The military had been my life for 12 years. I'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic, saving lives under circumstances most civilians couldn't imagine. My unit called me Steel, hands Sophia, because I never trembled, even during the most intense firefights. I could insert an IV line into a dehydrated soldier while mortars exploded 50 yards away. I could triage mass casualties with clinical precision. I could compartmentalize emotions that would paralyze most people. But nothing in my military training had prepared me for the Cold War I was fighting in my marriage. I'd met Daniel during my final deployment. He was a charming civilian contractor, working on infrastructure projects, tall, charismatic, with a disarming smile and stories that made everyone at the base's makeshift bar lean in to listen. When he asked for my number before returning stateside, I surprised myself by giving it to him. 3 months later, when my tour ended, he was waiting at the airport with flowers and that same smile that made my heart race despite my exhaustion. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Daniel showed me a life outside the regimented military existence I'd known for over a decade. Spontaneous weekend trips, elegant restaurants, and introductions to his sprawling family, the Caldwells, who owned various businesses throughout Denver. His mother, Vivian, the matriarch who had built their real estate company from nothing after her husband died young, regarded me with what I mistook for maternal approval at our first meeting. "A veteran," she'd said, squeezing my hand. "How wonderful. The discipline and loyalty you must have." 6 months after returning stateside, I purchased my first home, a modest 3-bedroom craftsman on the outskirts of Denver, nestled against the foothills with a view of the mountains that soothed something in my soul. I'd saved almost every penny of my combat pay and bonuses over my years of service. While my fellow soldiers spent their money on cars or partying during leave, I'd invested carefully, patiently building the safety net I never had growing up in foster care. The house was perfect, solid foundation, good bones, and enough character to make it unique. The moment I turned the key, I felt a sensation I hadn't experienced since childhood: permanence. This was mine. No one could take it away. Daniel proposed 3 months after I bought the house. We married in a small ceremony on my back patio, the mountains witnessing our vows. I was 34, ready for stability after years of transience. I'd left the military but found work as an emergency department nurse at Denver Memorial, where my combat experience made me invaluable during the worst traumas. Life developed a rhythm: my shifts at the hospital, Daniel's business trips, quiet evenings on our porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. The first disagreement came 6 months into our marriage when Daniel suggested we sell our little starter home and move into something more suitable in the Caldwell Heights development his family's company had recently completed. "This is my home," I explained calmly. "I bought it before we married. It means something to me." Daniel laughed, kissing my forehead. "Soph, it's just a house. The ones in Caldwell Heights are twice the size, with community amenities and better schools, for when we have kids. I like this neighborhood. I like my neighbors. Mrs. Espinoza brings me tamales every Sunday, and Jim across the street helped me fix the irrigation system last month." "You can make new friends," Daniel insisted. "Besides, the commute to the hospital would be shorter." I didn't tell him that I sometimes needed that commute, the 20 minutes of solitude before and after the chaos of the emergency department, to decompress. Instead, I simply said, "I'm not ready to sell." Daniel dropped the subject, but I noticed his mother's speculative glance the following Sunday when we visited the Caldwell family home for their traditional dinner. Vivian cornered me in the kitchen as I helped with dessert. Daniel tells me. You're attached to your little house, she said, slicing the apple pie with precise movements. It's my first real home, I replied, choosing my words carefully. After moving around my whole life, it means a lot to have something permanent. Vivian nodded with what seemed like understanding. Of course, dear. Stability is important, though family is the only true permanence in this world. Wouldn't you agree? I should have recognized the warning in her words, but I was still learning to navigate the Caldwell family dynamics. Their closeness both attracted and unsettled me. The inside jokes, the business discussions that dominated dinner, the way they all deferred to Vivian's opinions while pretending they didn't. As we settled into married life, I noticed subtle changes in our home. Daniel began referring to it as yours instead of ours whenever he was frustrated. He started pointing out flaws, the creaking stairs, the outdated kitchen, the small closets. He scheduled contractors to provide renovation estimates without consulting me, then complained about the cost. It would be cheaper to just move, he'd say, leaving brochures for Caldwell Heights on our counter. Meanwhile, I continued working at the hospital, where my combat experience had earned me a position training new nurses in trauma response. I maintained our home with the same discipline I'd applied to my military duties, creating the stable environment I'd always craved. I planted a garden. I painted the spare bedroom. I built shelves for my growing collection of books about native Colorado plants. I didn't know that Daniel was already discussing our future housing situation with his family, presenting my attachment to my home as a stubborn phase that would pass. I didn't realize my refusal to sell was becoming a symbol of my unwillingness to fully integrate into the Caldwell dynasty, and I certainly didn't suspect that my mother-in-law had already decided my little craftsman house was standing in the way of her family's expansion plans. The Caldwell Sunday dinners became a ritual I both anticipated and dreaded. Everyone gathered at Vivian's sprawling Tudor mansion. Daniel and his two sisters, their spouses, and a rotating cast of cousins, business associates, and family friends. On the surface, these gatherings celebrated family togetherness, but beneath, the laughter and fine wine flowed currents of competition and calculation. Sophia, tell everyone about that incredible save you made in the ER yesterday, Daniel would prompt, his arm draped possessively around my shoulders. His family would listen attentively as I described stabilizing a car accident victim with a punctured lung or recognizing the subtle signs of a stroke that others had missed. Such quick thinking, Vivian would comment. That military training certainly comes in handy, doesn't it? What they couldn't see was how Daniel's grip tightened when I spoke, how he'd interject to clarify technical details I hadn't actually gotten wrong, or how he'd subtly redirect the conversation when my stories garnered too much attention. Sophia's too modest to mention it, he'd say, but she's been helping me review potential property acquisitions for the Eastern expansion. She's got a great eye for detail. The truth was more complex. Daniel occasionally showed me property reports, but dismissed my concerns about environmental impact assessments or community displacement. When I questioned the ethics of buying up affordable housing to convert into luxury condos, he'd sigh. This is business, Soph. The kind of practical matters your military experiences didn't prepare you for. At work, I had autonomy and respect. My combat experience translated into unshakable calm during the worst traumas. Younger nurses sought my mentorship, doctors valued my assessments, and patients trusted my care. I'd been promoted twice in 18 months, now supervising the emergency department's night shift 3 days a week. But at Caldwell gatherings, I was positioned as Daniel's supportive wife, whose career was important but ultimately secondary. My professional accomplishments became anecdotes to entertain during cocktail hour, my medical expertise reduced to good instincts rather than years of training and experience. We're so glad Daniel found someone who understands hard work, Vivian would tell guests, patting my hand, and she's adjusting wonderfully to civilian life. 6 months into our marriage, Daniel's sister Melissa announced her pregnancy at Sunday dinner. The celebration was joyous, with champagne flowing freely and Vivian glowing with anticipation of her first grandchild. "Your beautiful home would be perfect for a nursery," she told Melissa. "But if you need more space, we have 2 units available in Caldwell Heights." Later, as dessert was served, Vivian turned to me. "And when will you and Daniel be needing more space, Sophia?" I felt the table's attention shift to my still flat abdomen. "We're not quite ready for children yet," I replied evenly. "I've just taken on more responsibility at the hospital." "Of course, dear," Vivian nodded. "Though at 34, you might not want to wait too long. The Caldwell family needs to grow." Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, not in solidarity, I realized later, but in warning. That night, he initiated our first serious discussion about children. "Mom's right," he said as we prepared for bed. "We should start trying soon." "I thought we agreed to wait another year," I reminded him, "until I'm established in my new supervisory role." "You're already established," Daniel countered. "You're respected. You've proven yourself. What more are you waiting for?" I couldn't articulate that I was still establishing my identity outside. The military? Still learning who Sophia McKenna Caldwell was beyond her service record and medical skills. Instead, I mentioned practical concerns about childcare with our opposing schedules. "That's easily solved," Daniel waved dismissively. "We'll move to Caldwell Heights where my family can help. Mom would love having grandchildren nearby." The conversation ended in an impasse that night, but Daniel began a subtle campaign. Baby clothes appeared in our Amazon cart. He mentioned friends from college who had children Sophia's age and regretted waiting. When I worked night shifts, he'd schedule family events during my sleep hours, then express disappointment when I was too exhausted to attend. Meanwhile, Vivian intensified her campaign against my house. During a garden party for Daniel's birthday, she cornered me near my prized rose bushes. "Such a charming little garden," she commented, "but so much work for someone with your schedule. The Caldwell Heights properties have professional landscaping included." When I hosted the family for dinner, showcasing my newly renovated kitchen with its farmhouse sink and butcher block counters, Vivian inspected everything with a critical eye. "Quaint," she pronounced, running a finger along the salvaged barn. "Wood shelving I'd installed myself. Though I wonder about resale value with these unique choices." I didn't mention that I had no intention of selling. This was my forever home, the first place that had ever truly belonged to me. The more they pushed, the more I entrenched, deepening my roots in ways both literal and figurative. I planted an apple tree in the backyard. I installed built-in bookshelves in the living room. I repainted the exterior, choosing a sage green that mirrored the foothills visible from my west-facing windows. What I didn't see was how my resistance was being positioned as selfishness within the family narrative. Daniel described my attachment to the house as Sophia's little fixation to his sisters. Vivian referenced my difficulty adjusting to family priorities. When I missed Sunday dinner because of an emergency department crisis, it became evidence of my continued prioritization of career over family. The facade of partnership with the Caldwells maintained its appearance, but beneath it lay fracturing foundations. I still smiled at family gatherings, still accepted Vivian's double-cheeked kisses, still nodded when Daniel spoke about our future plans. But increasingly, I felt like an exhibit under glass, the interesting war veteran who refused to fall in line with Caldwell expectations. What I didn't yet realize was that Daniel and Vivian weren't just hoping I would eventually capitulate. They were actively strategizing my surrender, analyzing my defenses for weaknesses, and preparing an assault on the independence I so fiercely protected. The first concrete warning came from an unexpected source. I was working a particularly brutal shift in the ER, 3 car accident victims, a child with a severe allergic reaction, and an elderly man having a stroke, when Monica from hospital administration appeared at the nurse's station. "Dr. Weiss needs these insurance forms for the Rodriguez case," she explained, sliding a folder across the counter. As I reached for it, she leaned closer. "And I thought you should know. Someone called verifying your employment yesterday. Said they were from Sunrise Mortgage." I paused, folder halfway to my chest. "I didn't apply for a mortgage," Monica shrugged. "That's why I mentioned it. They specifically asked about your income, length of employment, and whether you worked full or part-time." A chill settled between my shoulder blades. "Did you give them that information?" "Just confirmed you worked here. Told them all other information requires a signed release." She studied my face. "Should I flag it for security?" "No," I said after a moment. "It's probably just a mix-up, but thanks for letting me know." After my shift, exhausted but too unsettled, to sleep I drove home the long way, passing through neighborhoods where normal families were just beginning their days. I tried convincing myself it was nothing. Perhaps Daniel was refinancing something, or maybe it was identity verification for a credit card I didn't remember applying for. But the explanation felt hollow, especially given the mounting pressure to sell my house. When I arrived home, Daniel was already gone for the day, a note on the counter mentioning dinner with clients. I took the opportunity to search his office, something I'd never done before, a violation of trust that felt simultaneously wrong and necessary. His desk revealed nothing unusual at first: project files for Caldwell development properties, receipts for business lunches, our most recent tax returns. But in his filing cabinet, in a folder labeled Personal Projects, I found preliminary drawings for a contemporary home labeled DNS Residence, Caldwell Heights Lot 42. The plans showed a sprawling 5-bedroom with a 3-car garage, home theater, and nursery. The date on the plans was 3 months ago, well after our conversations where I'd made it clear I didn't want to move. Beneath these were financial documents, a mortgage pre-approval application with both our names, copies of my last 3, pay stubs that I hadn't provided, and a market analysis for my current home suggesting an asking price significantly below what I knew it was worth. My hands trembled as I photographed everything with my phone before carefully returning the documents exactly as I'd found them. That night, I barely slept, contemplating the implications of my discovery. Daniel wasn't just hoping I'd change my mind. He was actively planning our move as if my consent were a mere formality. The next day, I called in sick for the first time in 2 years and visited my bank. The mortgage specialist, a young woman named Jenna with bright eyes and a reassuring smile, listened patiently as I inquired about safeguarding my property. "So, the house is solely in your name?" she confirmed, typing something into her computer. "Yes. I purchased it before my marriage." "And you're concerned about unauthorized changes to the deed or mortgage?" I hesitated, reluctant to voice my suspicions about my own husband. "I just want to ensure proper protections are in place." Jenna nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "You can place a freeze on your title, which requires your in-person authorization for any changes. I'd also recommend setting up alerts for any credit inquiries or applications in your name." As she helped me complete the necessary paperwork, she slid a domestic resources pamphlet across the desk with her business card. "Just in case you need additional support," she said quietly. I stared at the pamphlet, which included hotline numbers for financial abuse resources. "Is it that obvious?" "Let's just say I've seen similar situations," Jenna replied. "Property is often at the center of control dynamics." I left the bank feeling both protected and exposed, like I'd revealed a secret I'd been keeping even from myself. The reality of my marriage was shifting beneath my feet, transforming from a partnership into something more insidious. That evening, I attended a hospital colleague's retirement party. Ellen had been a nurse for 40 years, the last 15 in our emergency department. During the speeches, she mentioned me specifically. Sophia brought more than medical skills from her military service. She brought strength, integrity, and the ability to remain steady when everything around her is chaos. Afterward, as we shared A quiet moment near the appetizer table, Ellen squeezed my arm. "You seem troubled tonight, Sophia?" Perhaps it was her forthright manner, or maybe just my need to unburden myself to someone outside the Caldwell orbit, but I found myself confiding in her about the mortgage inquiry and the house plans I'd discovered. Ellen listened without interruption, her weathered face thoughtful. When I finished, she asked, "What does your gut tell you?" "That I'm being maneuvered," I admitted. "That decisions are being made about my life without my input." She nodded slowly. In 40 years of nursing, I've learned to trust my instincts about people's intentions. When patients can't tell us what's wrong, their bodies still show the truth. She held my gaze. "What's your body telling you about this situation?" I realized then that I'd been experiencing the same hypervigilance I'd felt in combat zones, the heightened awareness, the constant evaluation of threats, the strategic planning of movements and responses. My body had recognized the danger before my mind had fully acknowledged it. "That I need to protect myself," I whispered. "Then do it," Ellen said simply. "And remember, you have allies. The military taught you about having battle buddies for a reason." On my drive home, I called my old friend Tariq, who had served with me in Afghanistan and was now a lawyer specializing in veterans affairs. I gave him a brief summary of my concerns without mentioning Daniel by name. "Document everything," he advised immediately. "Every conversation, every discovery, every unusual occurrence. Create a timeline. And Soph, get copies of all your important documents, birth certificate, military records, passport, and keep them somewhere safe outside your home." "You think it's that serious?" "I think you wouldn't be calling me if it wasn't," he replied. "Trust your training. When something feels wrong in the field, you don't ignore it because it might offend someone's feelings." That night, Daniel returned, home late, smelling of expensive whiskey and wearing the relaxed expression that followed successful business meetings. He kissed my forehead distractedly when I asked about his day. "Productive," he said, loosening his tie. "We finalized the East Side acquisition, 20 units, prime location." "Congratulations," I offered, watching him carefully. "Anything else interesting happened today?" He gave me a curious look. "Not particularly. Why?" "Just wondering if anyone contacted you about our mortgage." His expression shifted so subtly I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking for it. Momentary tensing around the eyes before his features settled into casual confusion. "Our mortgage? No, why would they?" The lie hung between us like smoke, acrid and suffocating. I smiled and shrugged. "Probably nothing. I just got a notification about an inquiry on my credit report. Might be identity verification for your hospital benefits," he suggested smoothly. "They just changed providers, didn't they?" Another lie, but I nodded as if that explanation made perfect sense. "You're probably right." As Daniel showered before bed, I slipped into his office and quickly checked the file again. The mortgage documents were gone, though the house plans remained. The removal confirmed what I already knew. Daniel was actively concealing his activities from me, and my gentle probing had alerted him to be more careful. That night, as Daniel slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and acknowledged the truth I'd been avoiding. I was at war again, but this time the battlefield was my marriage, and the enemy slept peacefully at my side, unaware that I'd discovered his first offensive maneuvers. Easter Sunday arrived with deceptive brightness, Colorado sunshine pouring through the windows as I prepared my contribution to the Caldwell family brunch. My grandmother's bourbon bread pudding, the recipe committed to memory during rare childhood visits before she passed. Daniel hummed in the shower, cheerful in a way that had become increasingly rare at home, but predictably surfaced for family gatherings. "Wear something nice today," he called over the sound of running water. Mom mentioned some important business. Associates might stop by. I selected a sage green dress that matched my eyes, paired with the pearl earrings Daniel had given me for our first anniversary. The woman in the mirror looked composed, professional. Nothing in her appearance hinted at the dossier of evidence accumulating in the locked drawer of her work locker, or the growing unease that had become her constant companion. As I applied. Lipstick. My phone chimed with a text from Ellen. Documents safely stored. Appointment confirmed for Tuesday. I deleted the message immediately. After our conversation at her retirement party, Ellen had offered to keep copies of my essential documents in her fireproof safe. She'd also connected me with her niece, a family law attorney who had agreed to meet with me confidentially. The drive to Vivian's estate was tense with unspoken words. Daniel made small talk about work projects and an upcoming golf tournament. While I responded with appropriate interest, the strain of our performance exhausting us both. As we turned through the ornate gates of the Caldwell family home, he suddenly reached for my hand. I know things have been strained lately, he said, eyes on the winding driveway. But family is everything, Sophia. Remember that today. The ominous note in his voice raised the hairs on my neck, but I nodded and squeezed his hand, playing my part in our charade of marital harmony. Vivian greeted us at the door herself, elegant in a lavender suit that complemented her silver hair. Daniel, darling, she embraced him first, then turned to me with her practiced smile. Sophia, you look lovely. Come in. Everyone's in the solarium. The Caldwell Easter brunch was an elaborate affair, sterling silver serving dishes laden with eggs Benedict, prime rib, smoked salmon, and fresh fruit artfully arranged on the massive dining table. Crystal flutes of mimosas circulated on trays carried by hired servers, while spring flower arrangements scented the air with hyacinth and lilies. Daniel's sisters were already there with their husbands. Melissa cradled her infant son, while her husband Jeffrey hovered protectively. Angela and her husband Robert were engaged in animated conversation with two men I didn't recognize, both in expensive suits despite the holiday. Those are the Muller brothers, Daniel murmured as we entered. Commercial developers from Chicago. Been trying to get them involved in the riverfront project for months. I nodded, accepting a mimosa from a passing server, noting how Daniel's hand at my lower back guided me toward his sisters rather than the business conversation. Family obligation first, then business, Vivian's unspoken rule for these gatherings. The meal progressed with the usual Caldwell dynamics. Business discussions thinly veiled as casual conversation, subtle comparisons between siblings, and Vivian, orchestrating it all from the head of the table. I participated when expected, sharing appropriately edited stories from the ER, admiring Melissa's baby, and complimenting the food. Sophia, how's that charming little house of yours? Vivian asked during a lull in conversation, her tone suggesting she was inquiring about a quaint but ultimately inconsequential hobby. Wonderful, I replied. The garden's coming alive with spring. My cherry trees are blossoming. So much work for someone with your schedule, she commented, not for the first time, especially with those long hospital shifts. I find it therapeutic, I said, maintaining my pleasant expression. Gardening is actually recommended for veterans. The connection to growing things helps with the transition to civilian life. Vivian nodded with manufactured understanding. Of course, dear. Though at some point one must fully transition, mustn't one? The slight emphasis on fully hung in the air between us. Before I could respond, she turned to the table at large. Actually, we have a bit of news that might interest everyone, especially our guests. Daniel straightened beside me, his posture shifting from relaxed to alert. I felt rather than saw his sisters exchange glances across the table. The city council approved our zoning request for the Highland Creek area, Vivian announced, looking pointedly at the Muller brothers. The entire neighborhood has been rezoned for mixed-use development. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Highland Creek was my neighborhood, the quiet, historically protected area where my craftsman house stood. The zoning had been residential only for decades, part of what had attracted me to the property. "When did this happen?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "The final vote was Friday," Vivian replied. "After months of negotiation, of course. These things don't happen overnight." Daniel placed his hand over mine on the table, a gesture that might look affectionate to others but felt restraining. "It's a significant opportunity," he added. "The Highland Creek location is perfect for the wellness community concept we've been developing." "Wellness community?" I repeated, the term unfamiliar. "Luxury residences with integrated medical facilities," one of the Muller brothers explained. "Concierge healthcare, fitness centers, spa services, all within a walkable community. The concept is exploding in retirement markets." The pieces clicked into horrible alignment. The Caldwells weren't just pressuring me to sell my house for family harmony. They needed my property for their development project. Highland Creek's established trees, craftsman architecture, and proximity to both downtown and the mountains made it ideal for the luxury development they envisioned. "The entire neighborhood?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We've already secured options on 60% of the properties," Vivian said proudly. "With the rezoning approved, the remaining homeowners will likely sell quickly. Property values are about to soar, but only for those who consolidate parcels for development." My mouth went dry as I realized the full implications. Individual homes in the area would lose value as commercial development encroached, while grouped parcels would be worth millions to developers. The Caldwells were positioning themselves to profit enormously from this transformation, and my home sat squarely in the middle of their plans. "You never mentioned this project involved Highland Creek," I said to Daniel, unable to completely mask the accusation in my tone. He squeezed my hand in warning. "It's been evolving for months, but we didn't want to burden you with the details while you were so busy at the hospital. Besides," Vivian interjected smoothly, "we have a wonderful surprise that makes this perfect. Timing for everyone." She nodded to Daniel, who cleared his throat. "We've secured Lot 42 in Caldwell Heights for us," he announced, turning to me with a practiced smile. "The premium lot with mountain views. I've been working with architects to design our dream home." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Happy Easter, sweetheart." Inside the box lay a key on a silver keychain engraved with "Our New Beginning." My stomach churned with the realization that this public ambush had been carefully orchestrated. The Muller brothers as witnesses. The holiday gathering ensuring family support. The presentation of the key as a gift, making any negative reaction from me appear ungrateful and unreasonable. I struggled to find words that wouldn't betray my horror while also not endorsing their plans. "Unexpected. I know you've been attached to your first home," Daniel continued, his public voice overlaying our private conflict with a veneer of consideration. "But with the rezoning and the incredible opportunity the Mullers are offering for the Highland Creek project, the timing couldn't be more perfect for us to move forward." "Forward," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "The contracts are ready." "For signatures," Vivian added, gesturing to her office. "We can handle everything today, so you won't need to worry about any of the details. Your contribution to the Highland Creek wellness community will be acknowledged, of course." "My contribution?" The question escaped before I could moderate my tone. "Your property," Vivian clarified as if speaking to a child. "Once it's transferred to Caldwell Development as part of the project portfolio. I haven't agreed to sell my house," I stated, the words falling into sudden silence around the table. Daniel's grip on my hand tightened painfully. "Sophia," he began, warning evident in his tone. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," I suggested, attempting to salvage some dignity from the ambush. "There's really nothing to discuss," Vivian countered, her smile never wavering though. Her eyes hardened. "The development is proceeding. The only question is whether you'll benefit as part of the family initiative or find yourself owning a devalued property surrounded by construction for the next 3 years. The threat was clear, but something in me, perhaps the part that had remained calm while taking fire in Afghanistan, or the part that made split-second life-or-death decisions in the ER, refused to surrender to intimidation. "I'll need time to consider my options," I said evenly. "Unfortunately, time is a luxury we don't have," Vivian replied. "The Mullers are only in town today. The contracts need signatures now to proceed on schedule." She turned to her son. "Daniel, perhaps you could explain the financial implications to Sophia more clearly in my office." I followed Daniel and Vivian into her wood-paneled office, my mind racing through tactical assessments as if I were back in a combat situation. The office door closed behind us with an ominous click, sealing us away from the witnesses at the brunch table. Daniel loosened his tie, his charming facade falling away now that we were in private. "This is happening, Sophia," he stated flatly. "The project is moving forward with or without your cooperation." Vivian settled behind her massive mahogany desk, a position of power she'd clearly chosen deliberately. "Darling, I understand your attachment to your first home. It's sweet, really. But you need to consider the bigger picture." "The bigger picture being your development project," I stated, remaining standing even as Daniel took a seat across from his mother. "The one you never mentioned involved my neighborhood, my home. Our primary focus was securing the zoning changes," Vivian explained with practiced patience. "Broadcasting our intentions would have only driven up prices prematurely. Or allowed homeowners to organize against the rezoning," I countered. Flash of annoyance crossed Vivian's perfectly composed face. "The City Council recognized the economic benefits of our proposal. Highland Creek has been underutilized for decades. It's a historic neighborhood where people live, not an underutilized asset," I said, my voice remaining steady despite my internal turmoil. Daniel sighed dramatically. "This is exactly why we handled the details, Sophia. You're too emotionally attached to see the practical realities." Vivian opened a folder on her desk, revealing a stack of legal documents. "The transfer agreement is straightforward. In exchange for your property, you'll receive a 10% interest in the Highland Creek LLC and priority selection of any unit in the completed wellness community. Plus the new house at Caldwell Heights," Daniel added, as if offering a generous bonus. "The lot alone is worth nearly what you paid for your entire current property." My mind caught on a crucial detail. Transfer agreement, not a purchase agreement? "It's a contribution to the family business," Vivian clarified. "More advantageous. Tax treatment when keeping assets within the family corporate structure." The scheme crystallized with sudden clarity. They weren't offering to buy my house at market value. They wanted me to donate it to their corporation in exchange for minority interest in a project that might never materialize and a house that would keep me firmly under their control. "I need to review these documents with my own attorney," I said, reaching for the papers. Vivian placed her manicured hand on top of the stack, preventing me from taking them. "That won't be necessary. Our family attorneys have ensured everything is in order." "I'm sure they have," I replied, "for the Caldwell interests. But as you've made clear, my interests may not align with the family's in this matter." Daniel stood, abruptly. "This is ridiculous, Sophia. You're acting like we're adversaries instead of family." "Am I family?" I asked quietly. "Or am I an obstacle to your development plans?" His expression hardened. "Right now, you're being obstinate for no reason. That house isn't worth the opportunity cost of delaying this project." "It's worth something to me," I countered. "Something more than money." Vivian sighed, exchanging a look with Daniel that I couldn't quite interpret. "Perhaps we should give Sophia a moment to compose herself. The situation is clearly overwhelming her. They left me alone in the office, presumably to pressure the Muller brothers into patience while I came to my senses. The moment the door closed, I began examining the documents they'd left on the desk, quickly photographing key pages with my phone. The agreement confirmed my suspicions. The transfer would give me a minority interest with no voting rights and no guaranteed timeline for project completion. The generous offer for my house amounted to approximately 60% of its actual market value. More disturbing were the attached exhibits, a complete dossier on my property, including interior photos I hadn't provided, detailed analysis of my renovation costs versus value added, and, most alarmingly, a psychological assessment of my attachment issues related to the property, citing my military trauma and history in foster care as factors in my irrational resistance to financially advantageous relocation. The clinical dissection of my personal history sent ice through my veins. They'd researched me like an opponent, identifying vulnerabilities and planning points of attack. The final page contained a handwritten note in what I recognized as Vivian's elegant script. Leveraging emotional security needs through D may yield more success than financial arguments. They'd been using my husband to manipulate my emotional vulnerabilities for months. I quickly texted Ellen. Situation escalating. Documents proving financial coercion. If I don't check in by 3 p.m., call Tariq. My fingers hovered over my phone, considering who else I could trust in this situation. I scrolled to my neighbor Jim's contact and sent, "If you see anything unusual at my house today, please document it. Possible legal situation developing." Jim, a retired police detective, would understand the implicit request without requiring detailed explanation. His security cameras also had a partial view of my property. Next, I called my bank's emergency line, the number Jenna had provided just in case. "This is Sophia McKenna," I whispered when the representative answered. "I need to verify no changes have been made to my accounts or property records since we spoke last week." "One moment while I check," the representative said. I heard keyboard. "Clicks, then. No changes have been attempted, Ms. McKenna. The security freeze is still in place." "Thank you. And if anyone attempts changes today, you'll receive immediate notification, and any actions would require your in-person verification with photo ID." Relief washed through me. At least my financial safeguards were holding. As I ended the call, I noticed a leather portfolio sitting on a side table, one I recognized as belonging to Daniel. He must have brought it in earlier and forgotten it in the rush to pressure me into signing. I hesitated only briefly before opening it. My ethical concerns about privacy now outweighed by the need for self-protection. Inside, I found a goldmine of information. Meeting minutes from Caldwell Development, discussing the Highland Creek project dating back 8 months, well before our disagreements about selling my house had begun. A list of homeowners in the neighborhood with notes about their acquisition difficulty. My name was marked as high resistance, approach through family channels. And most damning, a prenuptial agreement I'd supposedly signed giving Daniel rights to any property acquired during our marriage. The signature on the prenup wasn't mine. They had forged my signature on a legal document, a criminal offense that transformed this from a familial disagreement into potential fraud. I quickly photographed everything, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Years of emergency medicine and combat experience had taught me to function precisely when under threat. The door handle turned, giving me just enough time to replace the portfolio and step away before Daniel re-entered, flanked by the elder Muller, brother. James was just sharing some insights about similar development transitions in Chicago, Daniel said smoothly, his public persona back in place. Homeowners who initially resisted ended up significantly benefiting when they joined the project. Early. Muller nodded, his expression professionally sympathetic. "Change is always difficult, Mrs. Caldwell, but I've seen these wellness communities transform lives, especially for people with medical backgrounds like yourself. Many former healthcare professionals find fulfilling consulting positions within the completed facilities. They were now dangling career incentives, having recognized that financial arguments alone weren't persuading me. The calculated escalation of tactics would have been impressive if it weren't so disturbing." I appreciate the additional perspective, I said carefully, but I still need time to consider all implications. Time is the one luxury this project doesn't have, Mueller replied with practiced regret. The capital stack is time-sensitive, with multiple contingencies dependent on closing this phase of acquisitions today. Daniel placed his hand on my shoulder, fingers digging in slightly. Sophia understands the importance of timing in business. Matters. Don't you, sweetheart? The endearment felt like a threat. I removed his hand gently but firmly. I understand that rushing major decisions often leads to complications that time would have prevented. Mueller checked his watch with exaggerated concern. Perhaps I should give you two a moment alone. Vivian mentioned refreshing our drinks anyway. As the door closed behind him, Daniel's facade cracked. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Do you have any idea what's at stake here?" "I'm beginning to," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Though I suspect my understanding of the stakes differs significantly from yours." Daniel paced the office like a caged animal, his polished exterior deteriorating with each step. "You're being completely unreasonable," he snapped. "This project is worth millions, millions that benefit us, our future children, the entire family." "When did we decide this was our path?" I asked quietly. "When did we discuss transforming a historic neighborhood into a commercial development? When did I agree that my home would be sacrificed for Caldwell Development's profit margins?" "Your home," he repeated with derision. "Always your home, never our home. You've made it abundantly clear where your priorities lie. Because I purchased it before we met?" I countered. "Or because I've resisted your constant pressure to abandon it?" Daniel raked his fingers through his carefully styled hair, disheveling it in a way that would have been unthinkable before the brunch. "You need to understand how the real world works, Sophia. Sentimentality doesn't build financial security. This project secures our position in the family business for decades." "Our position?" I echoed. "Or your position?" His expression darkened. "They're the same thing. We're married, or have you forgotten that convenient detail? What benefits me benefits you." I thought of the forged prenuptial agreement hidden in his portfolio, the psychological assessment analyzing my vulnerabilities, the calculated manipulation of my emotional attachments. The man standing before me was suddenly a stranger wearing my husband's face. "I need air," I said abruptly, moving toward the door. "And time to think." Daniel stepped into my path. "There isn't time. The Muellers leave tonight. The contracts need signatures now." "Then they'll have to proceed without my property," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "That's not an option," he stated, his voice dropping dangerously. "Your house is centrally located within the development footprint. Without it, the entire eastern quadrant becomes non-viable." The pieces clicked further into place. My property wasn't just desirable, it was essential to their plans, which explained the escalating pressure tactics. "Move aside, Daniel." "Not until you see reason," he insisted, blocking the door. "This is happening, Sophia. Today. The only question is whether you participate willingly or force more difficult measures." The implied threat hung in the air between us. In that moment, with sunlight streaming through Vivian's leaded glass windows and Easter festivities continuing in the next room, I made a strategic decision. I would appear to concede enough to secure my freedom from this house, this situation, and these people. Once away, I could implement the protective measures I now knew were necessary. I allowed my shoulders to slump slightly, my expression to soften from determination to resignation. "I need to use the restroom. Then we can discuss terms that might work for everyone." Suspicion flashed across Daniel's face, but he stepped aside. "Don't make me come looking for you." In the hallway bathroom, I locked the door and immediately texted Ellen. "Implementing exit strategy. Meet at alternate location 4 p.m. Then I messaged Tariq. "Need legal intervention. Forged documents, possible fraud, coercion. Available today?" His response came quickly. In Denver for conference. Available anytime. What's happening? I sent him several of the photos I'd taken, including the forged prenuptial agreement. Caldwells attempting forced property transfer. More details in person. Don't sign anything, he replied immediately. Coming to you. Send location. I gave him Vivian's address, then splashed cold water on my face, evaluating my options. Direct. Confrontation would be dangerous given how much the Caldwells had invested in this project. Strategic retreat seemed wisest. Get safely away, then marshal legal resources to protect my interests. When I returned to Vivian's office, I found not only Daniel waiting, but Vivian and both Muller brothers as well, creating a wall of suits and expectations. Feeling better, dear? Vivian asked with manufactured concern. I'm ready to discuss practical next steps, I said carefully. Excellent. Vivian gestured to the documents still spread across her desk. As I was explaining to the Mullers, your contribution of the Highland Creek property will give you a 10% stake in the development LLC, valued at approximately $400,000 at project completion. A massive undervaluation of my property's actual worth, but I nodded thoughtfully. And the timeline for completion? 36 months from groundbreaking, the younger Muller brother supplied. Though your property would need to be cleared within 60 days of contract execution. I see, I maintained a contemplative expression. And my personal belongings? We've arranged professional relocation services, Daniel interjected eagerly, sensing capitulation. They can handle everything while we're on our trip. Trip? I asked, genuinely confused. Our second honeymoon, Daniel explained with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. 2 weeks in the Maldives, departing Tuesday. I've already arranged coverage for your hospital shifts. The revelation sent a chill through me. They planned to remove me from the country immediately after securing my signature, ensuring I couldn't change my mind or interfere with their rapid demolition plans. The urgency suddenly made perfect, horrifying sense. How thoughtful, I managed, my mind racing through implications. Though I'll need my passport from our safe at home. Already handled, Daniel replied smoothly. I collected all our travel documents last week, another violation I hadn't detected. I maintained my facade of reluctant acquiescence while inwardly revising my escape plan. Before I sign, I said, I'd like to review exactly what's included in the Caldwell Heights property. After all, if I'm giving up my home, I should understand precisely what I'm getting in return. Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded to Daniel, who produced a glossy brochure detailing the Caldwell Heights development and the specific lot allegedly reserved for us. Lot 42 includes nearly an acre of land, he explained, flipping to a map. The home design we've selected offers mountain views from the primary suite, a chef's kitchen, and this indoor-outdoor living space perfect for entertaining. I examined the materials with apparent interest, asking detailed questions about construction timelines, fixtures, and warranties, buying precious time while appearing to seriously consider their offer. What about my garden transplants? I asked. Some of my specimens are quite rare. I'd want to ensure they're properly relocated. Of course, Vivian agreed too quickly. We can arrange professional landscapers to handle that. Perhaps you'd like to inventory the specific plants. I would, I nodded. I also need to review my hospital schedule. Even with coverage arranged, there are patient transitions I'm responsible for. Daniel frowned. Those details can be handled after signing. The Mullers need to catch their flight this evening. The Mullers' schedule isn't my primary concern, I replied, allowing a hint of steel to enter my voice. If I'm agreeing to fundamentally alter my life on a few hours' notice, some accommodations for proper transition seem reasonable. The elder Muller glanced at his watch. Perhaps we could reconvene in 2 hours? That would still allow us to complete the documentation before our departure. Before Daniel or Vivian could object, I seized the opportunity. Perfect. That gives me time to collect my thoughts and make necessary arrangements. I'll need to go home briefly to check on my medication schedule as well. I'll drive you, Daniel said immediately. No need, I countered smoothly. You should stay with the Mullers, answer any remaining questions. I can take my car. I turned to Vivian with what I hoped passed for a conciliatory smile. I'll return by 4, ready to move forward appropriately. Vivian studied my face, searching for deception. Finding none obvious enough to challenge without appearing unreasonable in front of their business associates, she nodded reluctantly. Don't forget your Easter gift, Daniel said, pressing the velvet box with the Caldwell Heights key into my hand, his fingers gripping mine with unnecessary force. The message was clear. Don't disappoint us. I kissed his cheek, playing my role to the end. I'll be back soon. As I walked through the dining room toward the exit, Melissa caught my eye from where she sat, bouncing her infant son. Something in my expression must have alarmed her, because she stood and followed me to the front door. Sophia, she said quietly, as I retrieved my purse from the entryway table. Is everything all right? I considered my sister-in-law carefully. Melissa had always been the kindest of the Caldwells, though still firmly entrenched in family loyalty. Just some big decisions happening very quickly, I replied. She glanced around to ensure we weren't overheard. Daniel mentioned you might be resistant to the Highland Creek opportunity. I told him it seemed unfair to spring it on you without warning. A potential ally? Or another manipulation tactic? I couldn't be certain. It's a lot to process, I acknowledged. Melissa shifted her son to her other hip. If you need someone to talk to, she began, then faltered. I know how overwhelming the family can be sometimes. Thank you, I said sincerely. That means more than you know. As I walked to my car, I felt Vivian watching from the window, her silhouette visible through the sheer curtains. I waved casually, started the engine, and drove away with deliberate unhurriedness, turning toward home as expected. 2 blocks away, I pulled over and called Tariq again. Change of plans. Meet me at Ellen's house. I have 2 hours maximum before they realize something's wrong. Already on my way, he confirmed. Should I bring additional support? I thought of the forged documents, the psychological assessment, the calculated manipulation. Yes, I replied firmly. Bring everything we need to file emergency injunctions. The Caldwells are planning to bulldoze my house within 60 days. I drove to my house first, knowing the Caldwells would likely check my location using the tracking app Daniel had installed on my phone for safety. The app had initially seemed like a caring gesture, a way for us to find each other in an emergency. Now I recognized it as another method of control. At home, I moved with practiced efficiency, the same focused calm that had served me in combat zones. I gathered essential documents from my hidden lockbox in the utility room. My original birth certificate, military service records, financial statements from accounts Daniel knew nothing about. I packed a small bag with necessities, then retrieved my actual passport from where I'd secured it behind a loose bathroom tile after noticing Daniel's suspicious interest in our travel documents weeks ago. The passport I'd left in our shared safe was an expired one, a small precaution that now seemed prescient. I took photographs of every room, documenting my possessions. Outside, I did the same for my garden, pausing briefly at the cherry tree I'd planted on my first anniversary of civilian life. Its blossoms drifted like snow in the gentle spring breeze. I pressed my palm against its trunk, memorizing the feeling of its bark, then continued my documentation. In the garage, I located the spare key to Daniel's car where he always kept it, magnetized to the frame of his workbench. I slipped it into my pocket, then disabled the tracking app on my phone before sending one text to a number that would show in Daniel's call logs as Emergency Department Scheduling. The message went to Ellen. Coming now, package secured. Taking my own vehicle would be too obvious. Instead, I walked 3 blocks to the bus stop, paid cash for a ride to the Central Transit Station, then took a taxi to Ellen's modest ranch house on the opposite side of the city. The entire maneuver took 40 minutes, well within my 2-hour window, but establishing enough distance that I couldn't be easily followed. Ellen opened her door before I reached the porch. "You look like you're evacuating a hot zone," she observed, ushering me inside. "Accurate assessment," I replied, setting down my bag. "Is Tariq here yet?" "In the kitchen with Maya," she said, referring to her niece, the family attorney. "They're reviewing the documents you sent." I found them at Ellen's kitchen table, heads bent over printouts of the photos I'd taken at Vivian's house. Tariq looked up when I entered, his expression a mixture of professional assessment and personal concern. He'd put on weight since Afghanistan, traded his military uniform for a well-cut suit, but his eyes still held the same sharp intelligence that had made him an exceptional intelligence officer. "You've managed to stumble into quite a situation," he said by way of greeting. "Situation is a diplomatic term for it," Maya interjected. She was younger than I expected, early 30s at most, but her expression held the weathered determination of someone who had seen the worst of family legal battles. "What your in-laws? Our attempting constitutes fraud, coercion, and potentially criminal conspiracy." "Can we stop them?" I asked, taking a seat at the table. Maya spread out the documents methodically. "The forged prenuptial agreement is our strongest immediate leverage. It demonstrates intent to defraud, which strengthens any emergency filings we make regarding the property transfer." "We need to move quickly," Tariq added. "Based on what you've shared, they're prepared to bulldoze evidence if necessary." Ellen placed a cup of coffee in front of me. "How long before they realize you're not coming back to sign their papers?" I checked my watch. "Less than an hour. I told them I needed to check on medications at home, then would return by 4. "Then we work with the time we have," Maya said briskly. "I've prepared emergency injunctions to prevent any action regarding your property, and a restraining order against Daniel and Vivian Caldwell based on the evidence of coercion." "Will that be enough?" I asked. "It establishes legal protection while we prepare for the larger battle," Maya explained. "The forged prenup gives us grounds to file criminal charges if necessary, which should discourage immediate aggressive action against your property." Tariq pulled out his phone. "I have a contact at the Denver Police Department who handles financial crimes. With your permission, I'd like to brief him on the situation, not filing charges yet, but putting him on standby." I nodded, sipping the coffee Ellen had provided. The warmth steadied me as I considered my next moves. What about my safety? When Daniel realizes I've discovered the forgery and their plans— "You shouldn't return to your home tonight," Maya said firmly. "Once we file these injunctions, the Caldwells will be served within 24 hours. Their reaction is unpredictable." Ellen squeezed my shoulder. "You'll stay here. My neighbor's son is a police officer. He's already agreed to park his patrol car in my driveway tonight as a precaution." Their efficiency in creating a safety net around me brought unexpected tears to my eyes. After months of isolation within my marriage, the simple experience of people believing me, supporting me, and taking action on my behalf felt overwhelming. "Thank you," I managed, blinking back the emotion. Tariq nodded briskly, his military pragmatism a familiar comfort. "Time for sentiment later. Right now, we need to secure your position legally and physically." My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Where are you? Taking longer than expected." I showed it to the others. "They're getting suspicious." "Don't respond yet," Maya advised. "We need to file these injunctions first, establish legal protection before they realize what's happening." Ellen's landline rang, startling us all. She answered cautiously, listened for a moment, then held the phone out to me. "It's your neighbor Jim. Says it's important." "Jim?" I took the receiver. "How did you know to call here?" "Ellen's number was in the neighborhood directory," he explained quickly. "Thought you should know. Your husband just pulled into your driveway with what looks like a moving truck. 3 men are with him." My blood ran cold. Are they entering the house? Not yet. They're standing in the driveway looking at their phones, probably trying to reach you. How did you know to watch for something? Ellen asked, hovering near enough to hear. Sophia texted me earlier to keep an eye out, Jim explained. Good thing, too. Something doesn't feel right about this. Want me to intervene? I considered the risks. Jim was in his 60s, retired law enforcement, but still in good shape. Nevertheless, confrontation could escalate dangerously. No, I decided. Just continue observing from a safe distance. If they break in, call the police immediately. Will do. Be careful, Sophia. I hung up and turned to the others. They're moving faster than expected. Daniel's at my house with what Jim thinks is a moving truck. They're accelerating their timeline, Tariq observed. They suspect you won't return to sign willingly. Maya gathered her papers with renewed urgency. We need to file these injunctions now. I have a judge who owes me a favor. We can get these processed immediately if I bring them in person. I'll drive you, Tariq offered. Sophia, stay here. With Ellen. Don't use your phone. They may be tracking it. I nodded, remembering suddenly. Daniel's car key. I took his spare from the garage. I pulled it from my pocket. Can we use this somehow? Tariq examined the key thoughtfully. Possibly. Where would his car be now? Still at Vivian's house, most likely. He rode with me to the brunch. A slow smile spread across Tariq's face, the same expression he'd worn in Afghanistan when devising particularly creative solutions to tactical problems. That gives me an idea for creating a distraction while Maya files the injunctions. What kind of distraction? Ellen asked warily. The legal but inconvenient kind, Tariq assured her. Sometimes the best defense is a strategic offense. As they prepared to leave, my phone buzzed again with multiple texts and missed calls from Daniel. I silenced it, knowing each ignored message would increase his anxiety and potentially prompt hasty actions that would only strengthen our legal position. Ellen brought me another cup of coffee and a sandwich I couldn't remember asking for. Eat, she instructed in the no-nonsense tone that had intimidated generations of new nurses. You need strength for what's coming. I managed a few bites, my mind racing through contingencies and potential Caldwell countermoves. If they're all ready, at my house with a moving truck, they must have been planning this regardless of whether I signed the papers. Ellen nodded grimly. They never expected you to refuse. The brunch, the ambush with business partners present, it was all designed to create a situation where saying no would seem impossible. They underestimated what I've survived, I said quietly. Combat, foster care, emergency medicine. I've spent my life in situations where surrender meant destruction, and they made the classic mistake of people who've never faced real adversity, Ellen replied. They confused politeness for weakness. The landline rang again 40 minutes later. Ellen answered, then wordlessly handed me the receiver. It's done, Maya said without preamble. The emergency injunctions are in place. Judge Hernandez signed them immediately after reviewing the forged documents. No one can legally touch your property or remove anything from it. Relief washed through me. What about Daniel and the moving truck? Police have been dispatched to your address with copies of the injunction. They should be arriving any minute. She paused. Tariq's distraction worked perfectly. While we were filing the paperwork, he moved Daniel's car 3 blocks away and reported it stolen. Despite everything, I couldn't suppress a laugh. That's why he wanted the key? Exactly. Vivian and Daniel have been dealing with police reports about the supposedly stolen vehicle, which kept them distracted while we secured the injunctions. What happens next? I asked, my tactical mind already mapping subsequent moves. Officially, they'll be served with the injunctions and restraining orders within 24 hours. Unofficially, the police delivery to your house acts as preliminary notification. After that, we proceed with formal charges of document forgery and attempted fraud. They won't go down without a fight, I warned. We're counting on it, Maya replied, her voice hardening. Every aggressive action they take now strengthens our position. Judge Hernandez was particularly disturbed by the psychological assessment they compiled without your knowledge. He's added specific language prohibiting them from using your military service or childhood in foster care as leverage in any proceedings. After hanging up, I joined Ellen at her kitchen window. Dusk was settling over Denver, the mountains to the west silhouetted against the darkening sky. In the distance, a spring thunderstorm was gathering, lightning occasionally illuminating. The clouds from within. Appropriate weather for a confrontation, Ellen observed. My phone, which I'd left silenced on the table, lit up continuously with calls and messages from Daniel, his sisters, even Vivian herself. Each notification felt like another assault on my failing defenses. Eventually, I turned the device off completely. You should try to rest, Ellen suggested. Tomorrow will require all your strength. Though exhaustion pulled at me, sleep seemed impossible. I need to know what's happening at my house, I admitted. Ellen considered this, then nodded. Jim will call if there's news. In the meantime, let's focus on preparing for tomorrow. Maya mentioned a formal hearing is scheduled for 9 a.m. The landline's harsh ring startled us both. Ellen answered, her expression growing increasingly concerned as she listened. Yes, she's here. Hold on. She covered the receiver. It's Jim. Something's happening at your house. I took the phone. Jim, what's going on? Police came about 20 minutes ago, he reported. Showed some papers to your husband and the moving men. There was a lot of shouting, but eventually the truck left. And Daniel? That's why I'm calling. He left too. But not before I saw him taking photos of your garden with some kind of measuring device. Then Vivian arrived in a separate car. They appeared to be arguing, then both left. But now there's another vehicle parked down the street, with 2 men inside, watching your house. My combat instincts sharpened. Can you describe the vehicle? Black SUV, tinted windows, looks like private security. The Caldwells were having my house surveilled. Thanks for letting me know, Jim. Please stay away from them. Don't approach or engage. Already ahead of you, he assured me. But I thought, you should know they're not giving up easily. After I hung up, Ellen looked at me questioningly. What do you think they're planning? I'm not sure, I admitted. The measuring device concerns me. They might be preparing for demolition regardless of the injunction. But that would be contempt of court, Ellen protested. Only if they get caught in the act, I pointed out. And sometimes it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission, especially when you have money and connections. A plan began forming in my mind. I need to get back to my house tonight. Ellen's eyes widened. That's exactly what you shouldn't do. You have a restraining order, legal protection. Legal protection only works if someone enforces it, I interrupted. If they're willing to demolish my home despite the injunction, papers won't stop them. Then we call the police again, Ellen insisted. By the time police respond, critical damage could be done. I began gathering my things. I know the Caldwells. Now. They're calculating risks versus rewards. Right now, they believe destroying my house is worth whatever legal consequences might follow. Ellen blocked my path to the door. At least wait for Tariq to return. Don't go alone. The doorbell rang before I could argue further. Ellen checked the peephole, then opened the door to reveal Tariq and Maya. Their expressions were grim. Have a problem, Maya announced without preamble. Caldwell Development filed an emergency demolition permit with the city 3 days ago, citing structural damage that poses public safety risks. My house doesn't have structural damage, I protested. They submitted engineering reports claiming otherwise, Tariq explained. The permit was approved yesterday, before our injunctions were in place. Cold dread settled in my stomach. So, they can legally demolish my house? Not with the injunctions now in effect, Maya clarified. But they clearly planned this carefully. The demolition permit gives them a seemingly legitimate reason to take action, which complicates our legal Position. Jim just called, I told them. Daniel was at my house taking measurements, and now there's private security watching the property. Tariq's expression darkened. They're preparing to move regardless of the injunction. That's why I need to get back there, I insisted. Tonight. Absolutely not, Maya countered. Your presence would only escalate the situation and potentially violate your own restraining order. We need a different approach, Tariq said thoughtfully. One that doesn't involve putting you at physical risk, but still protects your property. I have an idea, Ellen interjected, but it requires some theatrical skills and community involvement. We gathered around her kitchen table as she outlined her plan. By the time she finished, even Maya was nodding reluctantly. It's unorthodox, the lawyer admitted, but legally sound. More importantly, it's effective, Tariq added. We use their own tactics against them. Public pressure, community witnesses, documented evidence. I felt a stirring of hope for the first time since discovering the house plans in Daniel's office. When do we start? Now, Ellen said firmly, reaching for her phone. I'm calling in some favors from my nursing network. Tariq, you contact your veteran resources. Maya, we'll need legal observers present. As they made calls, I retrieved my emergency kit from my bag, the same compact go bag I'd carried in Afghanistan, modified for civilian contingencies. Inside was a satellite phone Daniel knew nothing about, emergency cash, a tactical flashlight, and a small but powerful camera with night vision capabilities. Within an hour, Ellen's plan was in motion. Text chains and phone calls had mobilized. A formidable community response team without alerting the Caldwells. Nurses from Denver Memorial, veterans from my support group, neighbors from Highland Creek, and legal observers recruited by Maya. All were converging quietly on different streets surrounding my property, communicating through encrypted channels Tariq had established. Remember, Maya cautioned as we prepared to leave Ellen's house, this is observation only. Document everything, intervene legally, but avoid physical confrontation. No heroics, Tariq added, looking directly at me. We've got enough eyes on the property to ensure complete surveillance coverage. If they make a move, we'll have irrefutable evidence. I nodded, checking the battery on my camera. I understand the parameters. Ellen squeezed my arm. Are you sure you're ready for this level of confrontation? These people are your family. No, I corrected her quietly. They're Daniel's family. They made that distinction very clear today. We left in separate vehicles, approaching my neighborhood from different directions to avoid detection. I rode with Tariq, slumped low in the passenger seat as we parked 3 blocks from my house. Security team still in position, came the update through our encrypted channel, voiced by one of Tariq's veteran contacts. No movement at the property, but 2 additional vehicles just arrived at the Starbucks 2 blocks north. 4 men, carrying equipment cases. Contractors, Tariq muttered. Probably waiting for instructions. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a low rumble of thunder. The spring storm was moving closer, fat raindrops beginning to splatter against the windshield. At least the weather's on our side, I observed. Harder to demolish anything in a thunderstorm. Tariq didn't look convinced. Don't underestimate what people will do when millions are at stake. I've seen villages razed in monsoons when the strategic value is high enough. My phone, the satellite one unknown to Daniel, vibrated with a message from Maya. Movement at Caldwell residence. Multiple vehicles departing. They're coming, I said to Tariq, adrenaline sharpening my senses. This is it. He nodded grimly, checking his own equipment. Remember, documentation is our primary objective. We observe, record, report. The law is on our side now. We just need to ensure it's properly enforced. And if it isn't? I asked quietly. Tariq's expression hardened, the intelligence officer momentarily visible beneath the lawyer's facade. Then we moved to contingency plan B. He patted the small case between us. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. The rain intensified as we watched a convoy of vehicles approach my neighborhood. 2 black SUVs followed by a large truck with precision demolition emblazoned on its side. Then Daniel's Audi and Vivian's Mercedes. They moved with purpose, headlights cutting through the darkness and rain. "They're not even trying to be subtle," Tariq observed, documenting the procession with his camera. Our communication channel crackled with updates from observers positioned around the neighborhood. 7 men exiting vehicles carrying equipment, Caldwells speaking with crew foremen, security positioning at property boundaries. "This is Maya," came the lawyer's voice over the channel. "I'm at the north corner with legal observers and 3 police officers. We're monitoring but remaining out of sight until they explicitly violate the injunction." I watched through night vision binoculars as Daniel directed men carrying industrial flashlights toward my garden. My breath caught as one raised what looked like a chainsaw toward my cherry tree. "They're starting with the garden," I reported, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Destroying what can't be moved." "Documented," confirmed a voice I recognized as Jim's, getting clear video of the foreman receiving instructions from Daniel Caldwell. Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene in stark relief. Daniel pointing authoritatively, Vivian standing beneath an umbrella held by a security guard, workers preparing equipment. The thunder that followed seemed to vibrate through the ground, beneath us. "Perfect weather for plausible deniability," Tariq noted grimly. "If questioned later, they'll claim they were securing loose structures before the storm caused damage." The chainsaw roared to life, its harsh mechanical snarl carrying even through the rainfall. I flinched as it touched my cherry tree, the blade biting into bark I had tended so carefully. "Now?" I asked Tariq, my hands tightening around my camera. He checked his phone, then nodded. "Maya confirms we have sufficient documentation of injunction violation. Phase 2 begins." I sent the predetermined signal through our communication channel. "Meadowlark in flight." The response was immediate and precisely choreographed. Suddenly, lights blazed from multiple directions, not just flashlights, but powerful LED work lamps, set up by our veterans at strategic positions around the property. The demolition crew froze, momentarily blinded by the unexpected illumination. Simultaneously, vehicles that had been parked discreetly on surrounding streets started their engines and activated their headlights, creating a ring of light around my property. The demolition workers looked around in confusion as figures emerged from the darkness. Hospital colleagues in scrubs, veterans in military caps, neighbors I'd helped during snowstorms and power outages. All appeared silently, recording devices, held high, witnessing and documenting the Caldwells' actions. "What the hell is this?" I heard Daniel shout through the rain. Maya stepped forward from her position, accompanied by uniformed police officers. "Daniel Caldwell," she called, her voice carrying with professional authority. "You are in violation of emergency injunction 47B-103, prohibiting any alteration or damage to this property." One officer held up official paperwork protected in a plastic sleeve. "Sir, step away from the equipment immediately." Vivian emerged from beneath her umbrella, her imperious bearing undimmed by the rain soaking her designer outfit. "This is absurd. We have a valid demolition permit based on structural safety concerns," which was obtained fraudulently, Maya countered. "As documented in court filings submitted this afternoon, the injunction supersedes any previously obtained permits." The demolition crew foreman looked uncertainly between the Caldwells and the police. "We were told this was fully authorized," he protested. "Check your documentation again," one officer instructed. "This property is under court protection. Proceeding with demolition constitutes criminal contempt." Daniel's gaze swept over the assembled witnesses, his expression darkening when he spotted figures recording from every angle. "This is private property," he shouted. "You're all trespassing." "Actually," Jim called from his position, "they're all on public sidewalks or neighboring properties with owner's permission. No trespassing involved." Lightning illuminated Daniel's face, contorted with rage as he realized the trap he'd walked into. His eyes scanned the crowd, finally locking onto where Tariq and I stood partially sheltered beneath a large oak tree. "Sophia," he shouted, starting toward me. "What have you done?" Two veterans immediately stepped between us, former military police officers who now worked private security. They said nothing, their presence alone creating an effective barrier. Tariq leaned close to my ear. "Stay here. I need to ensure the documentation chain remains unbroken." He moved toward Maya and the officers, leaving me watching as my husband, the man I'd trusted with my heart and future, shouted accusations at the assembled witnesses. "She's mentally unstable," Daniel claimed loudly, pointing in my direction. "PTSD from her deployments. She's having paranoid delusions about our family's intentions." The crude attempt to weaponize my service against me might have worked in isolation. But here, surrounded by fellow veterans and medical professionals who knew me, it fell flat. "That's Dr. McKenna you're talking about," called one of my ER colleagues, a respiratory therapist named Carlos. "The woman who runs trauma response training for the entire hospital system. Try another angle, buddy." Vivian approached the police. Officers, her demeanor shifting from outrage to practiced charm. "Officers, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. As a prominent business family, we certainly wouldn't knowingly violate a court order. Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere dry?" "The only misunderstanding," Maya interjected, "was your belief that you could destroy this property without consequences. Officers, we have video evidence of Mr. Caldwell directly instructing workers to cut down trees despite being served with the injunction this afternoon." One officer turned to the demolition crew. "Pack up your equipment and vacate the property immediately." "This isn't over," Vivian declared, her mask of civility slipping. "We have resources you can't imagine." "So do we," came Ellen's voice as she joined Maya. "Community resources, ethical resources, and most importantly, truth." The demolition crew began reluctantly packing their equipment, clearly uncomfortable being caught in the middle of the confrontation. The foreman approached one of the officers, speaking quietly and showing paperwork, distancing himself from the Caldwells' scheme. Daniel made another attempt to reach me, but was again blocked by the veterans forming a protective barrier. "Sophia," he called, his tone shifting to the persuasive charm that had once won my heart. "We need to talk about this privately. This isn't who we are." "No," I finally responded, my voice steady. "This is exactly who you are. I just refuse to see it." Tariq returned to my side, expression grim but satisfied. "Police are taking formal statements from the crew. The foreman admits Daniel specifically told them to disregard any legal papers they might be shown, claiming they were fraudulent." Through the rain, I watched as the community I hadn't realized I had, colleagues, neighbors, fellow veterans, stood firm against the Caldwells' intimidation. People I'd helped, worked alongside, or simply greeted on morning walks had formed a human shield around my property, bearing witness to the attempted destruction. The demolition truck departed first, followed by the workers in their personal vehicles. The hired security team lingered uncertainly until Vivian gave them a dismissive wave. As they retreated to their SUVs, only Daniel and Vivian remained, standing in the downpour, staring at the community arrayed against them. Maya approached me, sheltered under a large black umbrella. "The police have everything they need. They've formally warned the Caldwells that any further attempts to access or damage the property will result in immediate arrest." "What now?" I asked, watching Daniel and Vivian engaged in heated conversation beside their cars. "Now we prepare for court," Maya replied. "Tonight's events just strengthened our case considerably. Attempting to demolish the property despite the injunction demonstrates willful contempt and validates our concerns about their intentions." Melissa's SUV pulled up behind Vivian's Mercedes. Daniel's sister emerged, looking shocked at the scene before her. She approached us hesitantly, stopping a respectful distance away. "Sophia," she called over the rain. "Is everyone all right? No one's hurt?" The genuine concern in her voice surprised me. "We're fine," I confirmed, "just protecting what's mine." She nodded, glancing back at her mother and brother. "I tried to tell them this was wrong," she said quietly, "for what it's worth." Before I could respond, Vivian beckoned imperiously to her daughter. Melissa gave me one last apologetic look before joining her family. The three Caldwells conferred briefly, then departed in separate vehicles, Daniel's tires squealing on the wet pavement in a final display of impotent rage. As the witnesses began dispersing, protected by their numbers and the continued presence of police officers, I finally approached my house. Yellow police tape now surrounded the property, marking it as a protected crime scene due to the attempted destruction. "You can't go inside tonight," Maya explained gently. "The police need to properly document everything first, but no one else can enter either." I stared at my home through the rain, the porch where I'd shared morning coffee, the garden now partially damaged, the cherry tree wounded but still standing. Like me. "Thank you," I said to those still gathered nearby. Ellen, Tariq, Maya, Jim, and others whose names I might never know but who had stood for justice when it mattered. "I don't know how to repay what you've done tonight." "You already have," said a nurse I recognized from the ER. "Every time you talked me through a difficult trauma case, every patient you've saved." "Your service didn't end when you left the military," added one of the veterans. "You just found new ways to fight for others." Ellen squeezed my arm. "That's what community really means, Sophia. Not using family as a weapon, but supporting each other when it matters most." As we walked back to our vehicles, I took one last look at my house, wounded but standing, surrounded by protection, weathering the storm. For the first time since discovering Daniel's betrayal, I felt something unexpected wash through me, stronger than the rain. Not just determination or resolve, but something warmer and more powerful. Hope. The emergency hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock Monday morning, less than 36 hours after the Caldwells' attempted demolition of my property. I spent Sunday preparing with Maya, reviewing evidence and practicing my testimony while Tariq coordinated with witnesses from the neighborhood and hospital. Denver County Courthouse stood imposing against the crisp blue sky that had replaced the previous night's storms. I climbed the steps wearing the same sage green dress from Easter brunch, a deliberate choice that Maya had approved, connecting the woman who had been ambushed at a family gathering with the composed professional, now seeking justice. "Remember," Maya advised as we approached the courtroom, "Judge Hernandez has already seen the forged documents and granted our emergency injunctions. Today isn't about convincing him of the Caldwells' intentions, it's about establishing the extent of their actions and securing permanent protection for your property." Inside, the courtroom was already crowded. Ellen and several hospital colleagues occupied the front row behind our table. Jim and other neighbors filled another section. I was stunned to see Melissa sitting alone near the back, separated from the rest of her family. The Caldwells had assembled their own impressive show of force. Vivian and Daniel sat at the defense table, flanked by 3 attorneys in expertly tailored suits. Behind them sat business associates, country club friends, and both Mueller brothers, apparently still in Denver despite their supposedly urgent departure. Daniel caught my eye as I walked past. For a moment, his mask slipped, revealing something that might have been regret before hardening into determination. Vivian merely adjusted her pearl necklace, her expression betraying nothing. Judge Hernandez entered, a stern-looking man whose reputation for intolerance of procedural games had made him Maya's strategic choice for filing our emergency injunctions. "We're here regarding case number 2023 CV4275, McKenna versus Caldwell and Caldwell Development," he announced, reviewing the papers before him. "I've already granted emergency injunctions based on evidence of attempted fraud and coercion. Today, we'll determine whether those injunctions should be extended and what additional relief might be appropriate." The Caldwell's lead attorney rose first, an elegantly silver-haired man named Richardson, whose reputation preceded him. "Your Honor, We believe this entire proceeding stems from an unfortunate family misunderstanding. My clients were attempting to include Mrs. Caldwell in a beneficial business opportunity while protecting her from unnecessary stress given her history of PTSD. The casual weaponization of my service record made my jaw clench, but Maya had prepared me for this. I remained expressionless as she rose to respond. Your Honor, we object to counsel's characterization of my client's military service. Dr. McKenna has no diagnosis of PTSD, as her medical records confirm. This misrepresentation exemplifies the Caldwells' pattern of using her veteran status against her. Judge Hernandez nodded. Sustained. Counsel will refrain from medical diagnoses unless supported by expert testimony. Richardson barely missed a beat. Of course, Your Honor. The point remains that my clients were acting in what they believed to be the family's collective best interest. The Highland Creek development represents a significant opportunity that would benefit all parties, including Dr. McKenna. By forging her signature on legal documents? Judge Hernandez asked dryly. That's an unusual way to express concern for someone's interests. We categorically deny any document forgery, Richardson replied smoothly. Any resemblance between Dr. McKenna's actual signature and the signature on the prenuptial agreement is purely coincidental and likely resulted from clerical error. Maya rose again. Your Honor, we've submitted expert analysis confirming the signature is fraudulent. Moreover, we have evidence that Mr. Caldwell subsequently used this forged document to attempt to secure financing for property development using Dr. McKenna's home as collateral without her knowledge. The judge turned his attention to Daniel. Mr. Caldwell, these are serious allegations. Do you maintain that you had no knowledge of the apparently forged document? Daniel stood, adjusting his tie. Your Honor, as CEO of Caldwell Development, I oversee numerous projects and sign countless documents. It's entirely possible a staff member made an error in document preparation. However, I categorically deny any intentional fraud. That doesn't explain why you attempted to demolish Dr. McKenna's property after being served with an injunction, Judge Hernandez observed. We had legitimate concerns about structural integrity, Vivian interjected, rising uninvited. Our engineers identified safety issues requiring immediate attention. Judge Hernandez fixed her with a stern look. Mrs. Caldwell, you'll speak when addressed by the court. He turned back to their attorney. I've reviewed the demolition permit application. Curiously, the engineering report was dated after the application was submitted, which seems chronologically impossible if safety concerns were the genuine motivation. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The Caldwells hadn't expected this level of scrutiny of their documentation. Your Honor, Richardson began, but the judge raised his hand. I'd like to hear directly from the parties involved, Judge Hernandez said. Dr. McKenna, please take the stand. Heart pounding but outwardly composed, I moved to the witness stand. After being sworn in, I faced the courtroom, meeting Daniel's gaze directly. Dr. McKenna, Judge Hernandez began, please explain in your own words the events leading to this hearing. For the next 20 minutes, I detailed everything, from the initial pressure to sell my house, to discovering the forged documents, to the Easter brunch ambush, to the attempted demolition. I described finding the psychological assessment the Caldwells had compiled and Vivian's handwritten note about leveraging emotional security needs. Throughout my testimony, I observed the Caldwells' reactions. Daniel alternated between staring at the table and attempting to catch my eye with imploring looks. Vivian remained impassive, occasionally whispering to their attorneys. Only when I mentioned finding evidence that they had researched my foster care background looking for vulnerabilities did her composure crack momentarily, her eyes widening in surprise that I'd discovered this. And you contend that at no point did you agree to sell or transfer your property to Caldwell Development? The judge asked. That's correct, Your Honor. I repeatedly stated my intention to keep my home, which I purchased before my marriage using savings from my military service. After I returned to my seat, Daniel took the stand. He presented himself as the concerned husband, worried about my adjustment to civilian life, trying to include me in family business ventures I didn't fully understand. Sophia's attachment to the house seemed unhealthy, he testified, his voice laden with manufactured concern. Our family therapist suggested it might represent a fixation on control stemming from her military experiences. Which family therapist would that be? Maya asked during cross-examination. Daniel hesitated. Dr. Lawrence Mitchell. Did Dr. McKenna ever attend sessions with Dr. Mitchell? Well, no, but... So Dr. Mitchell never actually evaluated or treated Dr. McKenna. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Not directly, no. In fact, Maya continued, Dr. Mitchell isn't a licensed therapist at all, is he? According to our research, he's a corporate consultant specializing in acquisition strategy who occasionally writes pop psychology articles, correct? The revelation drew audible reactions from the courtroom. Daniel's carefully constructed narrative was unraveling with each question. Vivian's testimony proved even more damaging to their case. Accustomed to authority and deference, she struggled with direct challenges to her actions. When Maya presented email evidence showing Vivian had directed staff to proceed with development plans that required my property months before any discussion, with me, her explanation was particularly revealing. Of course we made preliminary plans, Vivian stated dismissively. Sophia's resistance was unexpected but ultimately irrelevant. Family assets serve family interests. To clarify, Maya pressed, you consider Dr. McKenna's individually owned property, purchased before her marriage, to be a family asset? Once she married my son, her assets became Caldwell assets, Vivian replied with absolute conviction. That's how family works. Judge Hernandez leaned forward. Mrs. Caldwell, that is explicitly not how property law works in Colorado. Dr. McKenna's premarital assets remain hers unless voluntarily transferred. Vivian waved her hand impatiently. Legal technicalities aside, she married into the Caldwell family. Certain expectations naturally follow. The judge's expression darkened. Those legal technicalities are the foundation of property rights in this state, Mrs. Caldwell. By the time the Mueller brothers testified about their understanding of the property acquisition, revealing they had been told I had eagerly agreed to contribute my home to the development, the Caldwells case had collapsed beyond recovery. Judge. Hernandez called a brief recess before issuing his ruling. In the hallway, Maya squeezed my arm encouragingly. They've destroyed their own case, she murmured. Hernandez is furious about the forged documents and Vivian's dismissal of property laws as technicalities. When we returned to the courtroom, I was surprised to see Melissa had moved to sit directly behind me. Before I could question her, Judge Hernandez called the court to order. Judge Hernandez's ruling was unequivocal. The court finds clear and convincing evidence of attempted fraud, document forgery, and coercive practices by the defendants, he declared, his voice carrying through the now silent courtroom. The emergency injunctions protecting Dr. McKenna's property are hereby made permanent. Furthermore, the court orders a full investigation into Caldwell Development's business practices, particularly regarding the Highland Creek rezoning application. Vivian's gasp was audible. Daniel stared straight ahead, his face ashen. Additionally, the judge continued, given the evidence of psychological manipulation and attempted exploitation of Dr. McKenna's military service, the court is referring this matter to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. As we stood to leave, Melissa touched my arm. Can we speak privately? She whispered. We found a quiet corner near the courthouse cafe. Melissa looked nothing like the polished Caldwell daughter I'd known, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, her hands trembling slightly. I brought these, she said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. Inside were documents I immediately recognized, the original engineering reports for Highland Creek, showing no structural concerns with any properties, including mine. Why? I asked, studying her face. Because what they did was wrong. She said simply. I've watched my mother weaponize family loyalty my entire life, but this crossed every line. She hesitated. And because my son deserves to see at least one person in this family stand for something better. 6 months later, I stood in my garden, now fully restored and thriving. The cherry tree bore its scars from the chainsaw, but new growth had emerged around the wound, different yet somehow stronger for having survived the assault. The Highland Creek rezoning had been reversed following investigations into the Caldwells' fraudulent applications. Instead, the neighborhood had been granted enhanced historical protection status, ensuring its preservation for generations to come. I'd filed for divorce immediately after the hearing. Daniel initially contested it, but his legal position collapsed when evidence from the civil case led to criminal charges for document forgery. He eventually accepted a plea deal, probation, community service, and restitution, his reputation in Denver's business community irreparably damaged. Vivian hadn't fared much better. The investigation into Caldwell development revealed a pattern of questionable business practices extending well beyond Highland Creek. Major investors withdrew, partnerships dissolved, and the company that had been her life's achievement began a rapid decline. The Muller brothers had distanced themselves completely, publicly stating they'd been misled about the property acquisitions. Former friends suddenly developed selective memory about their involvement in Caldwell projects. Only Melissa had shown courage, testifying truthfully about her family's methods despite significant personal cost. She'd moved out of the Caldwell estate, establishing a separate life with her husband and son. We weren't friends exactly, but we had developed a cautious mutual respect. "Beautiful evening," Tarek observed, joining me beside the cherry tree. He'd been a constant support throughout the legal proceedings, his intelligence background proving invaluable in untangling the Caldwells' complex paper trails. Perfect for a house blessing, I agreed. Inside, my home hummed with activity. Ellen directed hospital colleagues arranging food in the kitchen. Jim and neighborhood friends set up tables in the living room. Veterans from my support group arranged chairs on the newly restored patio. This gathering wasn't just a celebration of legal victory, but a reclamation. For too long, I'd compartmentalized my life: military service, medical career, marriage, never fully integrating these aspects of my identity. The Caldwells had exploited these divisions, using my military experiences against me, my career as an excuse to exclude me from financial decisions, my desire for home as evidence of psychological dysfunction. Tonight marked a different path forward. On my dining room wall hung a shadow box containing my military medals alongside my medical credentials. Photos of Afghanistan teammates shared space with hospital colleagues. My garden yielded herbs now used in dishes shared with neighbors. As guests arrived, a vibrant mix of communities that represented all facets of my life, I felt a sense of integration that had eluded me since leaving the military. The careful boundaries I'd maintained between different aspects of my identity had dissolved, revealing something stronger and more authentic in their place. Maya arrived last, carrying a folder containing final documentation. "It's official," she announced. "The court has established a permanent protective order preventing any Caldwell family member or business entity from approaching your property or initiating contact." "What about the development near Boulder?" Ellen asked. "The one they shifted focus to after Highland Creek fell through?" "Suspended indefinitely," Maya confirmed. "Their financing collapsed when the forgery charges became public. The investors pulled out." Later, as twilight settled over the gathering, Ellen raised her glass. "To Sophia," she proclaimed, "who taught us all that home isn't just where you live, it's what you defend." The assembled friends, military, medical, neighborhood, lifted their glasses in response. In their faces, I saw something I had searched for throughout my life in foster homes, military postings, and finally in my marriage to Daniel. Recognition of my complete self, not just the parts that served others' purposes. As conversation and laughter flowed around me, I thought about Vivian's declaration during the hearing. Once she married my son, her assets became Caldwell assets. That's how family works. She had been terribly wrong. Real family, whether by blood or by choice, strengthens identity rather than consuming it, celebrates autonomy rather than exploiting it. My passport now rested safely in a new security box, my name and identity secure. My home stood protected by both legal safeguards and community vigilance. The Caldwells had tried to erase me, to reduce me to an obstacle in their development plans, but had instead catalyzed my strongest self. The cherry tree outside would always bear the scar from their chainsaw, a permanent reminder of how quickly security can be threatened. But like the tree, I had not only survived the assault, I had grown stronger around the wound, more firmly rooted, more abundantly alive.